starts with an idea, not with power, not with money, but with one person asking a question. Long before the name Silk Road made international headlines, there was a young man from Texas named Ross Ulbricht. To the people who knew him, Ross was intelligent, curious, soft-spoken. He studied physics, loved technology, and spent hours reading about economics and philosophy. Nothing about him suggested that one day he would become the focus of one of the largest cybercrime investigations in American history. But behind that quiet personality, another story was unfolding. Ross believed the internet could be different. He imagined an online marketplace that could operate outside traditional systems, where users could interact without revealing who they were. To him, it was more than just a website. It was an experiment, an idea he believed could reshape the internet. So he got to work. Day after day, night after night, he sat in front of his laptop, writing code, testing features, fixing bugs, and solving problems that only he understood. Weeks became months. Slowly, his vision began to take shape. Then, one day, he pressed a single button. The website was live. Its name was Silk Road. At first, almost nobody noticed. Only a handful of users found it. It looked like another small project, buried somewhere on the internet. But then, something changed. Word began to spread. More visitors arrived. More listings appeared. The number of users kept growing. What had started as a small experiment was turning into something much bigger. As the platform expanded, its reputation spread far beyond the people who used it. Soon, federal investigators became aware of Silk Road. They believed the site was facilitating a large volume of illegal transactions, and they began treating it as a major cybercrime investigation. But there was one problem. They knew the website existed. They knew it was growing. They even knew the username of the administrator. But they still didn't know who that person really was behind the screen. Ross watched his creation grow. Every new user, every successful transaction made him believe his system was working exactly as he had planned. He believed he had protected his identity. He believed he had thought of everything. But investigations like this aren't solved overnight. They don't rely on luck. They rely on patience. Investigators weren't looking for one giant mistake. They were collecting tiny pieces of evidence, one by one, waiting for the moment when all those pieces would finally fit together. And without realizing it, Ross had already left behind the very first piece, a small detail buried deep in the past, a detail so ordinary he never imagined it would become the beginning of the end. The first mistake. The perfect crime doesn't fail because of one big mistake. It fails because of one small detail that nobody thinks matters. By now, Silk Road had become one of the most closely watched online criminal marketplaces in the world. Investigators knew what they were looking at, but they still didn't know who was behind it. Every lead ended in silence. Every trail seemed to disappear. For a while, it looked like the person behind Silk Road had done the impossible. He had built a massive online operation without leaving a trace. But experienced investigators know something. Computers don't make mistakes. People do. Instead of trying to hack into Silk Road or guess who Dread Pirate Roberts was, investigators went back to the beginning. They started asking a simple question. When did Silk Road first appear? And who talked about it first? That question changed everything. While searching through old internet forums, investigators found something unusual. Months before Silk Road became widely known, someone had posted a message inviting people to visit a brand new website called Silk Road. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary post, one among thousands, easy to ignore. But investigators didn't ignore it. They looked closer. The account that published the message had also shared a contact email, an email address that would eventually become one of the first important clues in the investigation. That single discovery didn't solve the case, not even close, but it gave investigators something they had never had before, a direction. From there, they began connecting small pieces of information, old forum posts, public online activity, usernames, digital records. Individually, None of them proved anything, but together, they started forming a picture. For the first time, one name began appearing again and again: Ross Ulbricht. Investigators still couldn't arrest him. They still couldn't prove that Ross and Dread Pirate Roberts were the same person. Suspicion isn't evidence. They needed something stronger, something undeniable. So instead of making an arrest, they waited, quietly, patiently, watching, learning, building their case, one piece at a time. Ross had no idea that somewhere people were studying his past, reading conversations, connecting timelines, and following every clue he thought he had left behind. The man who believed he was invisible was no longer invisible. He just didn't know it yet. Now, the investigation entered its most dangerous phase, because finding a suspect was only half the battle. Catching him without losing the evidence would require perfect timing, and the FBI was already planning its next move: the hunt. Finding a suspect is one thing. Proving that the suspect is guilty is something else entirely. By now, investigators believed they knew who Dread Pirate Roberts was, but belief wasn't enough. In a courtroom, they would need evidence. Clear, undeniable. Evidence that could directly connect Ross Ulbricht to Silk Road. So they didn't rush. They watched, quietly, patiently. For weeks, they followed his routine. Where he went, where he worked, how he spent his day. Every movement mattered. Ross seemed relaxed. He continued living his life, as if nothing had changed. He visited coffee shops, spent hours on his laptop, moved around San Francisco without ever realizing he was being watched. The FBI knew one thing. If Ross realized, even for a second, that he was under investigation, he could disappear. Or worse, he could lock his laptop before agents could secure it. And if that happened, some of the most important evidence could become much harder to access. The agents couldn't afford to make a mistake. They didn't need a dramatic chase. They needed the perfect moment. So they waited, day after day, watching, learning, planning. Every detail had to be right. Where Ross usually sat, how long he stayed, who was around him, what time he opened his laptop. Nothing was left to chance. Then they noticed a pattern. Ross frequently worked inside the Glen Park Public Library in San Francisco. It was quiet, predictable, and most importantly, he often used his laptop there for long periods. For investigators, this could be their chance, but there was one problem. Ross's laptop had to be open, unlocked. If he had even a few seconds to close it or lock the screen, their plan could fall apart. Everything depended on timing. The FBI began preparing one of the most carefully coordinated moments of the entire investigation. No sirens, no dramatic raid, just a simple distraction lasting only a few seconds. Seconds that would decide whether years of investigation would succeed or fail. Ross walked into the library, believing it was just another ordinary day. He had no idea that undercover agents were already inside, waiting, watching, ready to move. The hunt was finally over. Now, it all came down to a single moment. The library trap, October 1st, 2013. It looked like an ordinary afternoon. People sat quietly, reading books. Students worked on assignments. Others browsed the internet without paying attention to the people around them. Among them sat Ross Ulbricht. His laptop was open. His fingers moved across the keyboard, just like they had countless times before. To everyone else, he was just another person working in a public library. But hidden among the visitors were undercover FBI agents, each one already in position, each one waiting for the signal. Months of investigation had led to this moment. There would be no second chance. If Ross realized what was happening and closed his laptop, investigators risked losing access to evidence they believed was important to the case. Everything depended on a few seconds. The plan was simple. One undercover agent would create a distraction, just enough to draw Ross's attention away from the screen. At that exact moment, another agent would move in. Then, it happened. Ross looked away, only for a moment, but that moment was enough. An FBI agent quickly secured the open laptop, while other agents moved in to arrest Ross. Within seconds, it was over. No chase, no gunfire, no dramatic escape, just silence. The man known online as Dread Pirate Roberts was now in FBI custody. For nearly 2 years, he had stayed hidden behind a screen. Now, for the first time, the mystery had a face. Ross Ulbricht. The laptop investigators seized that day became a central piece of evidence in the prosecution's case, alongside many other forms of digital and documentary evidence gathered during the investigation. The anonymous empire was no longer anonymous. News of the arrest spread quickly. Around the world, people were asking the same question. How had investigators found someone who seemed impossible to identify? The answer wasn't one brilliant hack. It wasn't one lucky break. It was patience, countless hours of investigation, and hundreds of small pieces of evidence, carefully connected until the picture became clear. But the story wasn't over, because the biggest battle was no longer online. It was about to begin inside a courtroom. The verdict. The arrest was only the beginning. Now, the investigation would be tested in court. Over the following months, prosecutors presented their case. They argued that Ross Ulbricht wasn't just the creator of Silk Road, but the person who had continued to operate it under the online identity, Dread Pirate Roberts. The case relied on a wide range of evidence, including digital records, messages, financial evidence, witness testimony, and material recovered during the investigation. Ross's defense saw the story differently. His lawyers challenged parts of the government's case and argued that the investigation and evidence should be viewed critically. The courtroom became a battle of facts, technology, and law. In February 2015, after weeks of testimony, the jury found Ross Ulbricht guilty on multiple federal charges related to operating Silk Road. A few months later, the judge announced the sentence: life in prison. No possibility of parole under the federal sentence he received at the time. The decision shocked many people. Some believed the punishment reflected the seriousness of the crimes connected to Silk Road. Others argued that the sentence was unusually severe and sparked a broader debate about justice, online anonymity, and sentencing in cybercrime cases. For years, that debate continued. Supporters launched campaigns, legal appeals were filed, and the case remained one of the most discussed cybercrime prosecutions in the world. Then, more than a decade after Silk Road first appeared, another unexpected chapter unfolded. In January 2025, President Donald Trump granted Ross Ulbricht a full and unconditional presidential pardon. For some, it was long-awaited justice. For others, it was deeply controversial. Once again, the name Ross Ulbricht was making headlines around the world. But regardless of where people stand, one fact remains. The Silk Road investigation changed cybercrime investigations forever. It showed that online anonymity can make investigations far more difficult, but not necessarily impossible. And it demonstrated how patient investigators, working through countless small pieces of evidence, can solve even the most complex digital cases. Ross Ulbricht's story isn't just about one man. It's about technology, anonymity, law, and the constant race between those trying to stay hidden and those determined to find them. Because in the digital world, every click, every message, and every decision has the potential to leave a trace. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change history, the legacy. More than a decade has passed since Silk Road disappeared, but its story never really ended. The website was shut down. Its creator was identified. The investigation was closed. Yet the questions it raised are still being asked today. How much privacy should people have online? Where is the line between freedom and responsibility? And can anyone ever be truly anonymous on the internet. Silk Road changed more than just one man's life. It changed how governments investigate cybercrime. After the case, law enforcement agencies around the world invested more heavily in digital forensics, cryptocurrency investigations, and international cooperation. The techniques used to investigate online crime continued to evolve because criminals were adapting, and investigators had to adapt with them. The story also changed public perception. For many people, the dark web stopped being just an internet rumor. It became a real place with real consequences, a place where technology could be used for innovation or for crime. The difference wasn't the technology itself. It was the choices people made. Ross Ulbricht's story is still debated today. Some see him as a visionary whose ideas crossed legal boundaries. Others see him as the person responsible for creating a marketplace that enabled serious criminal activity. Whatever your opinion, his case remains one of the most influential cybercrime investigations in modern history. But perhaps the biggest lesson has nothing to do with the dark web. It has everything to do with human nature. Ross believed he had created a system that couldn't be traced. Investigators believed every system has a weakness. In the end, it wasn't one dramatic breakthrough that solved the case. It was patience, persistence, and hundreds of tiny details that slowly came together until the truth could no longer stay hidden. The internet may seem endless, anonymous, impossible to understand, but every action creates a story. Every decision leaves a footprint. And sometimes, the smallest footprint is the one that changes everything. This wasn't just the story of Silk Road. It was the story of an idea, an investigation, and a reminder that in the digital world, the line between invisible and visible can disappear in a single moment.